Hi. So I'm going to talk to you today about something that comes up a lot when we're working with teams of all descriptions and a lot about senior teams as well. And that's the ability to really lean into difficult conversations and really to stay with it. So when you have a whole range of people around a table in a team that might be representing different departments or specialisms or different expertise, then people will have opinions. And therefore, it's really important to have a diversity of opinions. But often when you have a team, people find it difficult to actually disagree or to put their perspective if it's different to others' views as well. So often what we find is that, if you think about it as in a conflict continuum, you'll often find that there is a whole range. So it goes from everything which is that side, which is destructive conflict. And this is where, you'll get people disagreeing, but they're disagreeing in order to win the point or win the argument. And that's what it's all about. And this discussion is not about creating a good solution. It is about making sure that whatever it is that you win the point, your opinion prevails, whatever, and it doesn't move things forward. And it's actually about putting self-interest above team or organization interest. On the other end of the scale, again, is something that's really common, is where you have something like artificial harmony. Now, artificial harmony is where on the surface things feel polite, they're nice, there's like a real veneer of niceness, and people are polite, but people don't really discuss difference. Or if someone says like a controversial opinion, then people outwardly won't necessarily disagree with it. Now they disagree afterwards. They'll have conversations afterwards with other team members or other teams saying that they disagree. But in the meeting or in the discussion itself, that doesn't happen. And again, it's just as damaging as destructive conflict, this kind of passive defensive approach. Now, the thing that we're always working with teams to support them on is something called productive conflict, and that sits right in the middle. And it's something that's been talked about for a number of years, and people like Patrick Lencioni have really developed. And it's just a really nice way of describing the importance of actually leaning into the difficult conversations to sort of stay with it and to explain your perspective and to listen and to learn other people's perspectives, because in that way we can really start to educate people on our perspective, but also to take other people's perspectives on as well. And that's how we move things forward. And unfortunately, a lot of teams, a lot of cultures don't feel very comfortable with this. And so it's something that's lost. So what are the consequences of not being clear with each other? So often what you'll find is that because we don't outwardly disagree, you end up with just so many priorities that people just don't stay with it and really work through what it is that is the priority. And so everyone just follows their own priorities. You'll see missed goals and deadlines because people don't hold each other accountable for delivering on what they need to deliver. You'll often end up with them and us thinking, it's them over there. You won't believe what they've done. And you see people doing other things, but you don't critique or you don't challenge them. And therefore, you just see them as being the enemy. You'll often end up with things like stress, because it's stressful when you're seeing these situations and you're not speaking out, or you're actually in a situation and you're trying to win, and conflict is difficult. Conflict is very stressful. People feel frustrated, and often there's resentment as well because you're not able to actually express your feelings. People don't understand you, and they therefore think that maybe they're working against you actively. Another thing is you get cultural corrosion. So when people do avoid, or when people are destructive, it corrodes the culture. It makes it less constructive, and ultimately it leads to poor performance. Why do we find it so difficult? We've identified that productive conflict is so good for organizations. It's exactly what we need to do to help an organization achieve its strategy, to really be effective. So one of them is just the fear of conflict. It's so common. People have a very low tolerance for conflict. It makes us feel enormously uncomfortable. And often we would prefer to keep the status quo, even if we're desperately unhappy and we go home to our partner every night and moan about it, if it meant that we don't have the anxiety of conflict. Another thing is power dynamics. So you'll often find, so if there's hierarchy in the room, middle managers will stay quiet even though a senior manager might be expressing a direction that they disagree with, that they know that can't be achieved, because that power dynamic is there, and the threat that they have reward power over them or can make their career quite difficult. Another thing is the emotional discomfort of actually expressing ourselves, to actually start being vulnerable. If we start saying, look, we don't know, or we express how we really feel, that can really mean that people often suppress those emotions because it's too uncomfortable. Another thing is cultural considerations. So even our national cultures have a huge impact. We're actually filming this in Abu Dhabi, so we're doing some work at the moment, and that's a really big cultural consideration. I think they have like 6 or 7 different ways of saying no without saying expressly no. And so we really have to get multinational teams to think about how we can actually disagree in a very compassionate and constructive way. Another thing is lack of trust. I don't trust you enough to disagree, or for me to show vulnerability, or to say that, take my responsibility. It's better for me to win and not show any weakness. Or I don't trust what you're going to do with what I'm sharing with you. And then the last thing is organizational culture. So a culture can just be one where you can have a passive defensive culture, or you can have an aggressive defensive culture where, if you stand up to people, or if you feel that you're expressing your viewpoint, then sometimes there can be a either perception or real, that there will be negative consequences from what you're doing as well. So these can be really challenging, but the way in which we have to create culture change and create an environment where we can have productive conflict is where we do show courage and we initiate productive conflict. And it's really contagious. It's very difficult to be destructive or have artificial harmony when someone is right in the middle of being productive in their conflict. So I guess the question we would just want to leave with you is, where do you feel that you sit on that continuum, and where do you feel that your organization sits on that continuum? Is it artificial harmony? Is there lots of elephants in the room we don't discuss? Is it destructive conflict where, when we do have conflict, like people play to win, it's a zero-sum game? Or are you in that really great sweet space where we do feel able to share our opinions and it's not personal? So how do you actually engage in productive conflict? Obviously, one thing describing why and how and the challenges behind it, but there's some things you can do. And a nice model that you can use is the 5 behaviors of a cohesive team model. So this kind of looks at, how great leaders can extend trust to one another. So if you extend trust and trust in others that they'll handle your disagreement in a constructive way, is a really good place. And if you're open with others about the challenges that you face, the mistakes maybe that you've made in owning them, and the fears that you have, it means that we can really sit in that level of discomfort around productive conflict. And we can be open with each other. And we would often say, don't feel that you have to be openly, overshare. We would often describe things like skillful transparency, the ability to share how you're feeling, but do it in a skillful way where you don't make people feel uncomfortable or you don't feel too exposed. Another one is about how you actually lean into conflict. So, you're not afraid to engage in the dialogue around the issues that really matter. And every organization has certain issues which we are really, really stirred up about, but we just don't talk about. It could be an organization redesign. It could be a team that gets favoritism, whatever it is. We just don't lean into these things, but we do have lots of conversations and private thoughts about it. And also, not hesitating to disagree with, challenge or question one another, but it's all in the service of finding the best solutions. That's the highest context. It's about the best solution. It's about the singular goal that we're trying to achieve for the organization. Another bit is commitment. Ensure that nothing's been left unsaid. We walk away from a productive conflict conversation. We've said what we need to say. We don't walk away and resent the fact that we didn't say what we needed to say. And also the idea of weighing into buy-in. Like if you're going to buy in to a particular direction, then you have to weigh in with your opinion. When the decision's made, and providing you've been through a constructive process where you consent to it, even if you disagree with it, you've weighed in, you've been heard, and you can only do that if you're engaging in productive conflict. And then accountability, and that's something that we talk about a lot with clients, even the where we are at the moment. In Abu Dhabi is something we talk about a lot with accountability, is where we actually hold one another adhering to a commitment. So, when people don't follow through on the promises that they make, the things that they've actually committed to, then team members hold each other accountable, and that is productive conflict at its very best. And again, another way to actually ensure that we engage in productive conflict is not leaning on the hierarchy. So that means, if I have a problem with my colleague in an opposite department, my counterpart here, I'm too afraid to go to that person, or I'm too concerned about what their response might be. So what I do, I go to my manager goes to their manager and down, and then there's a response, and then goes back down this. And it's a really inefficient way of operating that takes up 4 people's time and is open to misinterpretation, misrepresentation, and that can be extremely damaging. Whereas really it's about peer-to-peer feedback, and that's one of the biggest indicators of effective performance in teams. And then finally, it's that focus on results. So great leaders are able to set aside their individual needs and concerns and focus really on what is best for the organization. And that they really, when they're engaged in productive conflict, they agree on what they agree on first and emphasize the importance of collective results that are directly linked to the organization's success. So they'll speak out and they'll relate why they're speaking out, because it's in the service of achieving their results. So again, question I might have for you here is, how comfortable are you giving critique or constructive feedback to your fellow managers, engaging in that productive conflict? How comfortable are you expressing that lone opinion when everyone else is thinking one way, but you're thinking differently because you've got a different perspective? How comfortable do you feel speaking out? And also, how can people ease those conditions? So what can others do to make you more comfortable expressing your opinion, to make sure that you know that it's going to be received and dealt with in the right way as well? My colleague Danny always says this, which is, being clear is kind. So being really clear, letting people know where you stand, letting people know exactly what your opinion is, what your perspective is, feeding back when, clearly there's something to be fed back on. That clarity is actually really kind, because you rate them or rate their relationships so highly that you're willing to put the relationship in jeopardy by speaking clearly. And being unclear is actually unkind to them as well. So we put videos out like this regularly. So it's for modern progressive leaders that are looking for tips in terms of how they work in their modern complex organizations. And these videos are also for HR practitioners and OD practitioners as well, that are trying to make sense in this ever increasingly difficult and complex world that we live in as well. So these videos are out all the time. So if you liked it, just hit the subscribe button and ting the bell, and you'll be notified when the next one comes out. Thank you.